Okay, we're going to get started. Hello and welcome to our webinar, Getting the IT Sector Ready for New UK Sustainability Policies. I am your host, Steve Haskew. I am Head of Sustainability at Circular Computing, working today in collaboration with Ingram Micro for the channel. In this webinar, we'll be exploring the latest government sustainability policies, what's needed to support the channel, and how you can ensure you're aligned from a sustainability lens. But before we get started, I'd like to go through a few items with you so you know how to get maximum value from today's session. My discussion with two key sustainability leads at the Ministry of Defence and DEFRA will take approximately 40 minutes with a 10-minute Q&A at the end. You'll be able to send text questions to today's guests at any time during the webinar via the questions tab in the control panel found on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll try and address as many of these as we can during the Q&A. We'll be taking a few polls during the session to gauge your position and where you are with your sustainability journey. When a new poll is released, you'll see a red notification in the right-hand side column. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out by email to all registrants, so you can share within your organisations. Now, I am delighted to introduce our guest speakers, Grant Morley, Climate Change and Sustainability Lead from the MOD, and Adam Turner, HMG Sustainability Technology Lead from DEFRA. So perhaps starting with you, Grant, could you please introduce yourself and share a roundup of any career highlights?
Well, good morning. My name is Grant Morley. I've done 30 years in the MOD as an infantry officer and IT program manager. And I left a few years ago to specialise in cyber consultancy. I've come back in now 3 years ago, working the sustainability desk. In fact, took over from Adam in defence CIO's area. And we've just produced, or I just produced last year, a new strategy for sustainable digital technology and services. And if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you all to have a look at that. It's on the government website. It covers our goals and objectives for the next 5 years for Epoch 1 of the MOD's climate change and sustainability strategy. But it's enduring, really. So I encourage anyone who's interested in dealing with the MOD to have a look at our strategy. It's well worth it. Thanks.
What I might do, Grant, is ask Vicky on our end to, when she sends the recording out, to send a copy of the link to the MOD site, if that's okay, so people have direct access via that link anyway.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah.
And the same for you, Adam.
And career highlights. Yeah, I'll try. Adam Turner. I work for DEFRA, and I'm responsible for government sustainable ICT strategy and policy. And I try to manage all of that through a group we call the STAR, which is Sustainable Technology Advice and Reporting. I've been with DEFRA for 4 years, as Grant says. Before that, I was in MOD for 11 years, trying my bestest, that's a word, to make MOD be more sustainable. And before that, I trained as an ecologist, working with bats and the like. So yeah, a long history in this. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you very much, both of you, for attending. I wanted to start with the theme around sustainability and how I feel personally that the channel might feel that it's suddenly crept up on them and it's an hour event and they've got to get busy and get into the game. But for those of us that work in the field around sustainability themes, we know it's a career job. Maybe, Adam, you can just give us an indication as to what STAR has done, where your involvement with government have been, and maybe we can just start there.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a really important point, actually, that the work that I'm doing now actually started in 2008. And this was led by a chap called John Taylor, who was the MOD CIO at the time. And MOD were the senior responsible owner for this work, actually, and around the creation of the Department of Energy and Climate Change. sustainable ICT and green ICT was part of that whole agenda. So this group that I chair now, that we call the STAR, that was called the Green Delivery Unit, worked basically to improve the maturity of operations across government under the green ICT banner. But of course, at the time, remanufactured type items and circular type thinking wasn't really in those conversations. What there was were things around screensavers, around moving from desktops to laptops, moving towards thin clients, moving towards more efficient data centers, all of these kind of things, as well as upskilling resources across government. Every single government department stated that they had implemented sustainability into their ICT architecture policies and strategies by 2015. And that was true. Whether that was being used or not is a different matter, but it was all there. What we've been doing through the STAR for the last 4 years is implementing stuff that you've hopefully seen. So the 2020 to 2025 strategy, Green and Government ICT, Digital Services strategy, that sets out what we have to do now and what we have to do by 2025. Also, the update to things like the Technology Code of Practice, which I can go into later. But essentially, that's the money. That's the pass, go and collect your £200 for every government department. So they have to prove that they are being more sustainable with this new digital service that they're, or technology that they're buying. If they don't, they won't get the money. It really is as simple as that. And the Green and Government commitments have been updated to include ICT as well. But as I say, this isn't new. This is an iteration of thinking. It's grown from let's do our updates at night when electricity is cheaper. Let's turn off our fancy screensavers and let's have laptops. To let's think circular. Let's think about resilience. Let's talk about slavery. Let's talk about social value. It's just that the recognition and the role of technology has grown from it's really, really about how we're using the kit to much more, oh, hang on, digital's underpinning everything we do day to day. And we have to recognize both the impacts and the benefits from that.
And how do you think, from the client side, Grant, implementing sustainability within the tech space is going to be for people actually in the business on the ground, say within Mod?
Well, as Adam said, I think this got off to a slow start. And what we're seeing now, it's a combination of the work that's been done in the past in integrating, as Adam was talking, into the architectural processes and so on. People are beginning to understand that. It's beginning to seep through into projects and programs. And that's part of a natural trend that just takes government perhaps a bit longer to get on board with some of these things. But you then combine that with the whole enthusiasm for sustainability, the increased awareness, everything from David Attenborough to ESG in business areas that is now becoming, a major player in how people take investment decisions. And we're riding, a bit of a crested wave of interest, and that's now coming through into projects. So when I first arrived, there were very few projects came to see me about, what do I need to do about sustainability? Now I simply don't have enough resource, and actually I've recruited extra resource this year in order to deal with that demand signal for sustainability advice for SMEs across MOD ICT. So the message has got there. What we really need to do is make sure that's now embedded into our requirements and tenders that go out, and it is now definitely an integral part of it, and particularly we've seen with social value as well over the last year, being integrated into all our ITNs, that is now coming through in a big way. So we've got to see that translated through then into the suppliers helping us to achieve our goals and objectives. And this is not something that we can do just putting out requirements and and badgering people in the supplier community to meet that. We need help as well with people to innovate and come to us and say, we can do this for you, or we've looked at your requirement and we think this bit you've got to do this way, but we can offer you, high-end computing, but which is highly energy efficient. In these areas, you can manage with, recycled or remanufactured devices, and actually that's going to save you money, as well as delivering your user requirement. So the projects are coming through now. They're expressing the requirements. We need the supply side to really help us then deliver that and become more sustainable. Over.
Do you suspect that there's a looming kind of misunderstanding of a common syntax or a common language between the market and the supply chain? Because if you type in sustainability, let's say into Google, you're going to get 9 billion places to go, and it's becoming an ever increasingly confusing space for those people coming into trying to kind of get themselves onto the right side of the line with regards to being fit for purpose for the public sector. Is there a common syntax or a place where people would start understanding what you guys need, or are they just going to rely on how things are specified?
Well, I think, that's the purpose of Adam's strategy and the work of the STAR. And they've also put out some guides and things like that as to what our expectations are across government. And we put out our strategy as to what our expectations are. We've got 6 goals and 18 objectives. Below that, we've got a whole load of tasks, but there's 18 objectives in there which have been published that make it very clear what we're trying to achieve to the supply chain. I think if you're looking at social value, of course, there's a lot of detail on the government website about that. And that has then developed I think that is the common syntax that everyone sort of understands what the government is looking for in terms of its input on social value and the outcomes from social value. So perhaps we haven't got that single syntax yet for the IT world, but I think we're very close to it. When you look at the 3 business rules that Adam developed, perhaps you want to talk about that in a minute, Adam, and you look at our strategy, which has taken those and developed them. There are definitely 3 key things we have to do, which is net zero, circular economy, and assurance. And I'll shut up about it now because I'm actually treading on Adam's toes here. But I mean, from my perspective in the MOD, that's what I need. Tell me how I'm going to reduce my energy consumption and my embodied carbon footprint. Tell me how you're going to make me more circular, and how you're going to demonstrate that to me, and then show me how you're assuring your supply chains. And it's a very simple ask. Adam. Are you on mute, mate?
I was just saying how brilliant Grant was. That's excellent. So yeah, we've got the government strategy, and then departments translate that. But for everyone who's out there, if you're trying to supply business, I totally get that. We're trying to define what we need as best we can. But perhaps when you hear we've got 18 objectives and 6 goals and stuff, it's still like and I do get that. And we've got to remember as well that only a couple of years ago, 99.9% of tenders coming out from the public sector would have been sustainability. Have you got ISO 14001? And that would have been it. And suddenly we're moving to a place where, as Grant's saying, there's all of this stuff. There's all of this. How are you going to help us? So the way I talk about it is really, really simple. Departments or whatever, public sector, whether it's health, education, a school, a hospital, whatever, will have a sustainability goal. They will have published that. They will have something on their website that says, we want to be net zero by this date, and we want to do this. When you are supplying a service to that organization, body, department, or whatever, what is the thing that you're supplying? How's that going to help them achieve that? That's it. That really is it. If you want to go into detail, as Grant says, there's all of these goals and objectives we can look at, but as Grant, it broadly falls into 3 areas: net zero, circularity, and transparency, or as Grant says, assurance. We need to understand what your services that you're going to supply is going to make things better than where we were before. If you're supplying new hardware, how much is that better, and how much is that going to continue to improve? If it's a new digital service, how are you going to help us to understand our use of that service and manage that risk?
And particularly, I would add just one thing to that on continuous improvement, because this is a journey to net zero by 2050 or 2040 or whatever your organization has come up with. And of course, it may not be the case in some government departments, but from the MOD, we particularly run very long contracts. So our starting point is not going to be our end point. And I mentioned innovation. This is where we need industry to do the horizon scanning and say, you know what, we can't do it now, but in 5 years' time, we can do this for you. And we can start planning now and do the implications of that so that we can reap those benefits in 2030. I admit our time frame is often longer than other people, but that's where we really need assistance from industry.
I think that's a really strong point in that, and I'm not going to go into the technical details of PPNs, but PPN 0621 around the decarbonisation plan and the market getting, if you like, carbon ready, is about kind of creating a baseline for the market and our side to understand where they are today, recognise that they might not be the total outfit that they want to be, but at least defining where their starting point is, and then from which they can take measured approaches to getting better. So obviously one of those challenges would be growing a business on the one side in industry and keeping your carbon going down on the other side. Sometimes are conflicting, but so long as they're representing it in an honest and transparent way to the client, that's a measurement against which the client can make a decision based on, do I want to work with this partner or not? Because at the moment, not everybody can demonstrate net zero. They can't. It's just an impossibility. But they need to recognise where they're falling short. You kind of agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think PPN is, I was thinking about how I would describe this today, and for some reason Bamber Gascoigne popped into my head. But I'm thinking kind of the PPN is effectively the starter for 10 question. And it's really quite simple and less simple for most, but most companies that I've been engaged with, large and small, have been on a bit of a journey the last couple of years to develop a net zero strategy and a net zero statement. And essentially, for all the words in that PPN, that's all it's saying. Have you got a net zero statement, and have you published it on your website or wherever? That is it. It's a tick in the box. And as Steve was saying, recognizing, and we are doing the same in government as well, recognizing that we have to move with that PPN to get more data and more specification behind that. And yes, hopefully it's been well communicated that it will move on, it will iterate, there will be more detail as time goes on. But we had to start somewhere.
On that note, there's a question here from Howard Gray. Sorry, Grant.
Sorry, and I would just add, that is very much, the supplier side. The other side of it is, yes, you can sign up to, net zero by 2050. You can produce a carbon reduction plan. That's great for your business, and that gets you in through the PQQ qualification to bid on the contract. But what I'm really interested in is how you're going to help me get to net zero. The PPN is just a starter. It's not the answer. So don't think that if I've done PPM 621, I'm home and dry. It's not. We need more assistance than that.
No, it certainly give you an advantage when you're tendering to go down the route that Grant was saying there.
Well, you won't. Yeah, you won't get through, will you? If you haven't got people.
No, I mean go above and beyond. So you tick that box.
Yeah.
Some people will just go tick that box. We've got a net zero. But as you say, add in a bit more detail around how we're going to collaborate, how we're going to iterate it through the contract to innovate. And to answer Howard's question, yeah, I think lower than 5 million is where this is going eventually. It was just like what else is out there across government at that 5 million threshold, and there were other PPNs at that 5 million threshold, so it was matched. But I think it will eventually apply to more.
I think the rhetoric within the land of sustainability is all about collaboration. It's about transparency. Yeah. It's not just about a selfish act that I'm going to ring fence my own piece and that's me done. It's about releasing your intent to your customers, but also to the suppliers you're taking product from. So if you're promoting product through the channel into the customers, how well do the suppliers know the backstory of the products and services that they're on selling? I think there's a bit of work to do around. We spoke about that sort of supply chain resilience, Grant.
Yes, it's the assurance side of it, really, and this is incredibly difficult. I mean, no one's saying that this is an easy win. You know, net zero and carbon accounting in the IT space is pretty difficult. Then delivering real circularity is very challenging because the OEMs want to sell you new. You know, the software people, don't want you to use old software. How are we going to break that whole supply chain up and make it circular? That's a real challenge. So then the third leg, which we talked about, which is supply chain assurance, is even more difficult. How do you get down to some of the issues in, Uyghur labor in Shenzhen, and assuring that your factory is free of that? If Apple can't do it, it's going to be very difficult for other people. So I think that is a real challenge. But go back to that issue. It's a journey. What can we do now? Can we get some form of audit into our supply chain? Can we then make that audit independent? So we're not doing it. We've got someone who knows better than us about the details of the supply chain. And if you look in, the clothing industry is probably a bit further ahead on this. They're really wrestling with it now. What can we learn in the IT business from people like the clothing industry who are going through this right now? But we've got to move there, and we've got to demonstrate that assurance of our supply chain. But it's really tricky, and no one's saying it isn't.
No, and I think to be really clear here, from my point of view, nobody would be expecting any supplier into government to be able to report fully on what's going on in the supply chain, as Grant says. I feel like, but what we would expect is that you're showing that you're trying to do something about it. And a really easy example of that is signing up to something like the Responsible Business Alliance or Electronics Watch. Just a commitment that you are doing something. And then you, as Grant says, moving towards auditing and understanding that. But the big guys and girls are not able to state that they haven't got slavery in their supply chain, that there isn't conflict minerals and gold from the Congo and all this. It is in the supply chains. We just have to accept that at the moment and move towards a better place.
I think that's a really good statement right there, because it is about the tomorrow, creating that baseline, making an understanding of where you currently sit, and looking yourself in the mirror and going, right, what is going to be acceptable to me, and what things am I not going to compromise on, will determine how you write up with using carbon as an example, how you write up your carbon strategy. Because it might be that we will only deal with suppliers that, or we will only deal with customers at that. So if the customers aren't demanding of a supplier that's heavily committed to a sustainability outcome, maybe they're not the right customer for the supplier, and vice versa, because it's too much like hard work otherwise, trying to convince somebody that they should be carbon neutral because of these things on the right hand. And on the left hand, they're kind of creating a bit of a sort of a smoke and mirrors, almost a greenwashing. I noticed in one of your posts this month or last month now, Adam, about the CMA policy and what's happening there. But I think that's a really positive thing, even though it's sort of like a bit of a stick approach. But I think it's needed.
Yeah, so if people haven't seen it, the Markets Authority have published pretty much legislation that says that thou shalt not greenwash. And there's lots of examples out there of companies that are using green branding to sell products. When you dig a little bit beneath the surface, those things do not stack up at all. And I won't go into examples. There's plenty out there. I think the tech sector is potentially rife with these. We're an industry that relies a lot on stats and data to sell products, and we know that some of the statements that have come out from certain places don't stand up to much scrutiny. So in terms of this Markets Authority legislation, what I'm doing is working with Crown Commercial Services and the Cabinet Office to try and work out how procurers across government best assess statements from companies around what they're saying they can and can't do. And my advice to anyone tendering to government was just make sure that whatever you're saying stacks up. Realistically, the level of scrutiny is going to be fairly low because of the number of contracts and the number of people that work. I mean, we have to be realistic here that we can't go into the science behind every statement. But, if you're a data center provider saying that you're running on 100% green energy, I'd suggest make sure you've got the evidence to show that that's true.
On that point, Adam, is it likely, do you think, that the government would recognise certain auditors? So if I make statements, as an organisation, we use third parties to evidence and audit our thinking and our processes. Do you think that that's going to be part of the thing, almost like financial accounting?
Yeah, I think that's where it's moving to. So as one of the questions says in the chat is on business rules, and that's what we tried to put in there, was that your targets and your statements are in line with the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And again, I think some people have got slightly bogged down in this, but that's an organisation that can basically look at what you're saying that you're going to do and give you a tick or not if it stacks up against their methodology. So I say that's a really, really simple one that people can do, again, that is well known and out there. I think what the standardization keeps coming up, and there is lots and lots that needs to be done in this space, and we could do a whole separate couple of hours on the need for standardization. But it is recognized, and one of the big areas is around net zero and what that actually means, and what the value of offsetting or not actually is, because we're very much in a position now. You only have to look at the Winter Olympics that are currently going on. You can seemingly buy yourself green, and that is not what this is meant to be about. And it's moved very, very quickly, this whole thing. But I think we are, as a direction of travel, I think if you can secure your energy supply, or even self-generate your energy supply, and manage your resources and understand what's going on and share that data openly and transparently, you're going to be in a pretty good place.
I think that is it. It's about trying to be the best version of where you are today. Again, going back to this baseline data, one of our challenges is we're a remanufacturer. We make stuff and we move it around the world, and those two events unfortunately do kick out carbon. But I can tell you exactly to the nearest kilo what that is, because we're audited and we created our first baseline year in 2017. It's a good job that we did, because we feel we're kind of ahead of the curve slightly. We've got our stall in a relatively decent order. That doesn't mean we have all the answers today. We're still very much eyes open and listening to what is best advice. But I think that those resellers that want to engage with the public sector do need to give themselves a good look in the mirror and understand that this isn't a nice to have. This is if you don't have it. So don't try and double down on your win of contracts. In other words, if you're winning £100 million worth of public sector contracts, your strategy should be not to have 200 million next year, but to protect the 100 million you're currently invested in by being a better version of your organization today and tomorrow. That will then give you access to growth in that market. I think we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah. Sorry, Grant, I feel like I'm doing all the talking. Do you want to?
No, I was talking far too much earlier on.
Okay. I think big picture wise, we're in a world of narratives at the moment, aren't we? And it's very hard to challenge the narrative. And the pervading narrative around digital is that it's gonna save us all. AI and blockchain and IoT are the saviors to make. We heard it at COP26 enough time. We just need new technology, and it's going to save us all. And that falls into the digital space as well. But what's going on is I'm also involved in things like the national digital strategy, the national data strategy. I'm also involved in things internationally like digital nations and something called CFIT, CFIT, if you want to look that one up. Lots of other things internationally. And what is being recognized is that, and I mean, we all know this, but at a really senior level, at ministerial level around the world, they are starting to wake up to the fact that perhaps, that digital has its own risks. And this all goes into what Steve was just saying, because part of that is recognizing that with this, we are all increasing consumption of digital. We are all increasing consumption of services. And what is coming down from the ministers into the likes of MOD and other departments is the need to manage that risk. And the only way that can be done is, as I said before, through the management of your data and your resources, in order that your department or your agency or your body can be more resilient. And you're going to be a lot more resilient if you are using, for example, remanufactured IT than if you are using brand new IT and relying on certain updates. And that's less obvious at the moment, but I think the world we are moving to is very much in that space. And if you don't want to buy remanufactured, sorry, Steve, but there are equally a good model out there would be to go in with someone and insist on a circular model of ownership with that supplier. So that perhaps potentially they take things back after 2 years and they themselves remanufacture, or perhaps in partnership with someone like Circular Computing, and do that model that way rather than buying directly. But this is what I'm talking about here is narrative, and the fact that people are now waking up, and it's being seen less as green left-wing sandal-wearing lunatics and more about resilience.
And just so I would come in on that, and of course, and I think it was mentioned in the chat as well. When you start talking about scope 3, I mean, we at the moment in government do a lot of reporting on scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So our IT really fits in our scope 2 emission across the MOD, but no one's really dealing with the scope 3 emissions. And that's where you get the benefit of circularity. And when you look at that across the MOD, of course, it's huge. I mean, it's huge in any industry. And the question is, how are we going to slim down that aspect of our carbon footprint?
For those in the room that don't understand the differences between what scope 1, 2, and 3, could you just give a quick snapshot of what your understanding is?
Scope 1 and 2 scope 1 is direct emissions from fuels. Scope 2 is indirect carbon emissions from electricity, purchased electricity. But of course, the grid is getting greener, so anything you run off the grid arguably could get down to zero in, 10, 20, 50 years, 20 years time, perhaps. Scope 3 is the embedded carbon that's been used to manufacture or transport your goods. So, building those computers in China, extracting the materials from Africa, shipping them or flying them around the globe, that has an enormous carbon footprint, and then distributing them around UK has an enormous carbon footprint. So that's your scope 3. It's the embedded carbon in your or embodied carbon in your products. And of course, that really says, well, we need to buy less, because if we buy less, we can slim down our embodied carbon. If we recycle and reuse, BS 8001, cascade stuff, remanufacture stuff, that's going to reduce our carbon footprint, provided it's properly assured, of course, and you're not flying stuff around the globe, Steve. But I'm sure you're fully assured, so that's fine. But that's where, and I think the comment was about internal tax. Of course, how do you change behaviours? In the MOD, we're looking at, can we hold a financial risk against our carbon budget? So it's fine to, have X million tons of carbon against your name if you're a top level budget holder. How do you drive the behaviours to minimise that? And one thing we're looking at is holding a financial risk against that level of carbon that equates to the offsets that the organisation would have to buy. And that's a good way, because top level budget holders, big organisations like the Army, the Air Force, will be held to account by the Permanent Undersecretary, 2nd PUS, for what they're doing about their carbon budget and their financial overheads. So it's
I think that's quite interesting, because if it is true that the circular economy is a main component of a decarbonised future, I argue that is true. And one of Adam's goals, or the greening ICT goals, is to include a higher proportion of a reuse model, so refurbished or remanufactured, into the procurement. How is government going to be audited that they're achieving those goals?
That's one for you, Adam.
Sorry, Adam.
Right. No, wouldn't it be a lovely world if there was a direct line of accountability? So realistically, what would happen is the National Audit Office or the Environmental Audit Committee from the Cabinet would suddenly think, oh, let's ask those guys that question. And it will have come from a question from Parliament or something like that. There will be audits, and this will be picked up in those audits. It would be untrue to say that I have managed to successfully, but I'm working on this to get it in place, that there are, red lines and KPIs operating at such a senior level that we are able to draw distinct lines of accountability down to departments, and that, senior leaders across government and permanent undersecretaries are held to account for meeting those targets. That is not the case. However, I would say I guarantee that those targets would be picked up in an audit at some point.
Well, I think also understanding it a bit, Adam, because actually by putting it into green government commitments, and saying that we have to conform to, an increase in annual reuse, upgrade or remanufacture of devices, actually there is a reporting mechanism there now.
Yeah.
And that's left us all scratching our heads, going, how are we actually going to, how we don't account for that now? How are we going to account for it, in the greening government commitments? So again, what we're doing is we're now putting out, I'm drafting some policy that says every project team and program has got to include a requirement for remanufactured, upgraded, reused computers when they're buying office ICT. So that hopefully will translate into project behaviour, and we just need to work out how to capture that.
Does that feel like a sorry, Grant? Does that feel like a responsibility? Let's call it a KPI of the procurement office, of the legal office, or of the IT procurement? Because there are many stakeholders, obviously, in the procurement process, but the responsibility has to sit with somebody against which they can be held accountable, I feel.
Yeah, that's a difficult one that we need to work through. It's either commercial function or as part of, we capture a lot of data from our commercial tool set on all sorts of things, including the amount of money we spend on ICT and so on and so forth. So it's not difficult to say, well, let's flag up those purchases that are reused or remanufactured by the amount of kit or by the amount of spend. So I would see that as a commercial function, really.
Okay. If it's okay with you guys, I know we've answered a fair amount of the questions in the chat. There's a couple there that I would like to have a little look at, if that's okay. I've got one from Anthony Levy, who asks about frameworks and the life of a framework being 3 or 4 years long. How should small innovative companies in this space serve government when there are no frameworks which are, so effectively, if a framework starts today and it's plus 4 years, it's 2026 before that framework is relaunched. Is there scope perhaps to having midterm breaks on the framework to adopt innovation that is not available today, but say in 2 years' time is?
Well, I think that's a subject for Crown Commercial Service, not us.
I think that's an economical matter.
Do you think it's a good idea that could happen?
That's a really good idea. I think a couple of things around that for everyone to be aware. It is certainly not the case that everyone uses the frameworks. Crown Commercial Services may talk like that is the case. It really isn't. Also, if those departments, agencies, bodies, and public sector and whatever look on the frameworks and can't find what they need, they can just go off and do what they need anyway, and find that. But there are so many examples of people operating outside the frameworks. And the other thing is, obviously, there's quite a lot of competitions and funding that gets pumped out from government and various departments for innovation. And I've seen a load go out in the last couple of weeks. So that's another angle of this. But Anthony, that is a brilliant idea. And I think I will take that away and speak to my colleagues in CCS about how the market's moving so quickly that that's a very valid point.
Terrific. I've got another question for the carbon tax. You mentioned the carbon tax, Grant, briefly, without going into the depths of it. Do you think that is going to be something that will be a key driver for organisations to sort of sit up and pay attention to actually getting involved in the specification of products that have a carbon benefit, let's say?
I think, we're at an early stage. I mean, this is ideas coming out of General Nugent's Climate Change and Sustainability Review that was conducted last year. We're still waiting for the detailed plan to emerge from that, which I gather is going to be produced this summer. But we've got to do something about it. We can't just have an amorphous lump of carbon sitting there with no behavioural change to drive it down. So the question is, what are those levers? And in the MOD, as Adam will validate, the biggest lever is money, as it probably is in all government departments. So how do you monetize your carbon? And if you can do that, you can change behaviours, and that's really what we're trying to do. I
can talk more briefly about bigger cross-government stuff, if you like. So what I'm trying to do, and this is just to set the direction, and I have to be slightly careful about this because this isn't happening yet, but as a set of direction, what I'm trying to do, and I'm having some success in doing, is that departments bid for money, and this is announced on the news through something called spending reviews. and that spend is managed through something called QBR process, quarterly budget reviews or basic reviews, where Treasury sit down with departments and say what they're doing. I'm trying to join up this thinking, as Grant was saying, not talking about it as carbon budgets as such, but certainly saying that as a department, as an agency, as a body, you have these objectives to meet, and there are a bunch of stuff around all kinds of things, but included in that are sustainability objectives. And I'm trying to link up that thinking with digital, and this all comes back to what we were saying about earlier. How is digital going to help you meet that thing, your target? And if you can show through your product or service that you will lower the carbon consumption of that department, that would be a huge tick in the box for spending at that really, really senior level. But this is a shift in mindset. It's like the culture change shift that was needed around, or is still needed around, remanufactured IT. This is a much broader thing to actually going, digital is part of this solution, it's part of the answer, but it's also part of the problem, and this is how we're going to monetize these decisions. Have we lost Grant?
So there's work. There's obviously work going on and ongoing in that regard.
There absolutely is, and yeah, I mean, it's very big and complicated, and way beyond my pay grade. But
yeah,
it is the space it's going. I think, ultimately, I think there will be carbon budgets as a whole for departments or for organizations, and you can take chunks out of that for delivering your services. Anyway,
in terms of the one last question I have, Adam, before we round up, I see Grant's been called away. With regards to the staff, for the people in the room, the star group isn't obviously just Adam and Grant. It is made up of a series of people from many organisations within the government. Could you just expand on how that the star organisation looks, and
sure.
why it's of importance to the group?
So all of government IT is governed under Cabinet Office and Joanna Davidson is the new CDDO, Chief Digital and Data Officer for government. We report directly into that body, and our membership is made up of empowered sustainable ICT reps from every government department, agency and body. And some departments act as an umbrella for everything underneath of them. Some of the agencies and bodies send individual reps. We've also got academia and charities, NGOs, and we've also got Tech UK on there as a sort of industry body, for better or worse. So that's where it is at the moment. And what we do is we write the policy and strategy for government, and we do the annual reporting. So we've got a sort of 50-50 split down the middle. And every year, actually on March the 1st this year, I will be going out to every department, who in turn, the likes of Grant across government, to go out through their commercial teams and ask their suppliers for data around our footprint, our resource management, or as we used to call waste. Much better to talk about resources, to talk about policy and talk about strategy, i.e. what are they going to do and what have they done, and we report on that.
There's no way that other people within digital don't know about the intentions, and therefore the responsibility of the other people in the room here today, the channel, in communicating that up to the stakeholders within government, moves us away from product and price, and it gets us into a different higher level of kind of conversation.
Yeah.
in aligning that overarching agenda, which is the purpose, I think, of sustainability, is to make sure that you're aligned to your client and your supplier, and not just purely peeling off product because it's cheap.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about this very much, but I think it's really important. So the social value PPN, I said about the net zero PPN in a nutshell is, have you got a net zero plan? So the social value PPN in a nutshell means 10% on your procurement for social value and everything under that. And what social value is doing is lumping together all the bits and pieces of socially type stuff that would have existed, but it also includes sustainability. with IT and digital, it's recognized that the global nature of our supply chains are so complicated and so as an openly full of risk that percentage is added on top of social value. So you're looking at between 12 and 18%, which might raise a few eyebrows. Almost a fifth, potentially, for some departments or some public sector organisations for sustainability. And what that does, Steve, is exactly what you just said. It stops being just about price. It stops just being about all the other things that we would have traditionally talked about. It's much more about what is this product, service, technology, whatever it is, going to do for us, helping us be more responsible, helping us be more resilient. So the social value act for me is a huge tick in the box, a huge helpful tool to get sustainability to where it should be, up there and alongside with cyber security type thinking in terms of global marketplace resilience and all the rest of it, for assessing new tenders.
Thank you. Listen, thank you both for an enlightening discussion. Really, really useful, particularly 12 to 18% of tender. That's an amazing stat commercially for organisations to kind of really motivate themselves to get their own ship in order. So I'd like to thank Adam and Grant. Lots of really wonderful examples and practical advice, which I hope everyone in the room has enjoyed. So finally, on behalf of Circular Computing and our collaborative partners today, Ingram Micro, a big thank you to our guest speakers, Adam Turner and Grant Morley, to Vicky and Nathan from Circular, who are managing the back end of production behind the scenes. Thank you very much. And most of all, of course, to everyone that's attended today. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it thought-provoking. And most of all, I hope you found it a valuable use of your time. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.